The Sunday Papers on Off the Ball.
Great to have you with us here on the Sunday Papers. I'll run you through the front pages first of all. Sunday Times are going big with the FA Cup semi-final yesterday. A gift for Easter. It's a picture of Zach Steffen. Well, he's just realising things have gone very badly for him as Mane puts the ball into the net. So City goalkeeper Wembley Howler proves decisive as Liverpool stay on course for a quadruple. Beneath that as well, a story about Paul Pogba in ugly exchange with United fans after abuse at Old Trafford. So he was getting dog's abuse and he dared put his hands to his ears, and they all went apoplectic when he did so. So that's Pogba and the end game really for him at Old Trafford. Sunday Independent, they are going with Munster's win yesterday at Thomond Park. Munster march on is the headline, and then beneath that an acknowledgement that the championship very much up and running. Easter rising as big guns set to face off, not least Limerick against Cork today. We have Sun Sport then. Don't look Zach in anger. This is Pep backing his goalkeeper after the howler yesterday, and that Pogba story as well. Pog's abuse for Star. Sunday World go with Kinahan, keeps on scoring at the moment. Reds walk Con. Manchester City 2, Liverpool 3. Yesterday we have the Sunday Mirror, again a picture of Mane celebrating hand of quad. Jurgen Klopp last night urged Liverpool to become the quad squad and win the quadruple. We have the Mail on Sunday then. Mane fires up Liverpool's quadruple dream. And then a story which catches the eye. 88 footballers failed drug tests. Back page of the Mail. Fair to say. We're joined on the line by Sarah O'Donovan, All-Ireland winning camogie player. You can hear us there, Sarah?
I can indeed.
Great to have you with us. And in studio, Irish international, former coach in France and Wales, Bernard Jackman. Great to have you in as well.
Good morning.
88 footballers failed drugs test, so that would catch the eye. We should elaborate on that for people. 15 Premier League stars on the list, but given no bans. This is Edmund Willison in the Mail on Sunday. At least 15 Premier League footballers failed drug tests between 2015 and 2020. Not one of them was given a ban. So in total, 88 footballers failed tests between 2013 and 2020. But to focus on the Premier League for a moment, 12 of the failed tests by Premier League stars were for banned performance-enhancing substances, including one positive test for an amphetamine and 3 findings of triamcinolone, which was very much discussed around Bradley Wiggins and that Tour de France win about a decade ago. So if I flick inside to page 63, the piece is given a full page within. 15 top-flight stars failed drugs tests, but no one is banned. So the piece continues that one positive test for an amphetamine, 3 findings of triamcinolone. There were 4 positives for the stimulant Ritalin and 1 for a testosterone booster as well, a hormone which the piece says is often abused in cycling and mixed martial arts. The remaining top-flight positives were for steroids and a derivative of a diuretic as well, which can aid weight loss. So the reason that there were no bans is that UCAD say they were down to either accidental ingestion or therapeutic use exemptions. And then cocaine features as well here, which I don't think will shock anyone massively. Thoughts on all this, Bernard?
Yeah, it's pretty shocking, to be honest. There was a big feature on cocaine in French rugby actually during the week in L'Equipe, which went quite deep and had some startling revelations. But this is phenomenally worrying or shocking. I know we shouldn't be shocked with drugs in sport, but what's really interesting is they've got a kind of a graphic here of the non-league Premier League players who failed drug tests between 2013 and 2020, and the bans that they got for those failures. And then on the right hand side they've got the Premier League players, and it's the same type of drugs but no sanctions, and it really brings home, I think, if you have the money behind you to, I suppose, argue your case and fight it and obviously provide medical backup, etc. It seems that they're getting, they are getting a much more lenient sentence or no sentence compared to the non-league Premier players. And just one little bit is in October 2019, a 15-year-old child registered Premier League club was found with a banned human growth hormone dispensing pen and banned for 9 months. Look, there's so much money, there's so much at stake here. It's not a surprise that drugs involved, but I think the two things that jump out at me, as I said, one, the non-action against the Premier League players who have been found to have ingested these drugs, but also how slow. So this information's come out under the Freedom of Information Act, but it took 3 times longer than it should have to be processed by UK anti-doping. So it's not a good look for soccer and football in the UK in this article.
The piece says, again, sticking with the Premier League story for a moment, it must be assumed that 3 players who tested positive for triamcinolone had TUEs in 2017 and 18. None were sanctioned. Triamcinolone is an anti-inflammatory drug that can, for example, be injected locally to treat knee injuries. However, it can also be used as a performance-enhancing drug by a non-injured athlete. So the presumption is that the players in question were injured. So, for instance, Bradley Wiggins used the drug legally after acquiring a TUE, although a parliamentary investigation found that Britain had crossed a, quote, ethical line, end quote. Players tested positive for Ritalin in 2018 and 19. It's used to treat ADHD, attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, but it can also enhance performance, is the point. And then he writes here, the Premier League are understood to be comfortable that all 12 performance-enhancing cases had innocent explanations, hence no punishment from UCAD or the FA, the bodies that police drug testing. We're at a stage in sport, Sarah, where TUEs across sport can and be and are abused, and then in other instances they are completely legitimate. And so that will be the question Premier League clubs will be asked now, to maybe give more evidence or to assure people that the use of these TUEs was absolutely legitimate.
That's a funny, I suppose, from my point of view, I did a drug test in 2007 in Croke Park. We had just lost to Wexford. I'm coming down the tunnel, I'm absolutely gutted. An All-Ireland final, I get the curly finger. I find myself in a kind of a standard kind of back room in Croke Park, and I have a lady standing in the room with me, and she's asking me to take a drugs test. And I'm wondering, how have I found myself in this position? And all of a sudden, have I or should I be worried about the situation I put myself in? And I'm looking here at the instances of, I suppose, a failure, right? And at that point in 2007, we weren't educated on the sensitivities of drug testing. And over the years, we became very aware of the things that you could or couldn't do or take, paracetamol, Nurofen, the triggers. And I suppose it's laid bare here in terms of the substances that have, that trigger a positive or negative test. And as a starting point, I feel like the education around drugs testing needs to be looked at. And I don't know if Bernard would agree with me on this. You're thrown into it before you're even aware of how you could effectively fail a test.
Yeah. Well, it's just, I think in professional sport, it's probably a lot easier because they have the players on site all the time. So they run webinars, educational briefings. It depends whether it's the head of medical or the doctor that runs that. So I think from a professional point of view, and now in Irish rugby or in all professional rugby, you're getting these kids on contracts in the academy. So you're probably getting a chance to educate them a little bit earlier. And certainly all players know that if they're going to take anything that's not food, that they need to run it by the head of medical. I suppose from amateur sports, that's where it's a lot more difficult in terms of do they know what they're allowed to take?
Sure.
But there is an onus now on the athletes, whether it's amateur or pro, to understand what's legal and what's not.
And to be fair, in these instances, we're not talking about those kinds of drugs. We're talking about ones that really you can't just buy over the counter. So I mean, the question really is for things like triamcinolone and Ritalin. The issue is that these drugs can be used absolutely legitimately. So, for instance, the piece does point out triamcinolone is an anti-inflammatory drug that can, for example, be used locally to treat knee injuries. So if you look here, we're talking here across the space of 5 years, and I'm seeing triamcinolone once, twice, three times in 5 years. It's not beyond the bounds of possibility that footballers would have needed an injection into their knee and a doctor gave it to them, and hence it showed up in a test. I don't think, if we had seen 200 cases here of triamcinolone, then I think it would be very questionable, and there would be a real sense that the TUE system was being completely abused. Ritalin, 1, 2, 3, 4 cases of Ritalin. It's an ADHD medication. Again, very much open to abuse if you don't need it, but is it beyond the bounds of possibility that across however many players are in the Premier League that it would have been found in player systems 4 or 5 times? It's not. So, I guess we need more information here. Is the piece suggesting that these TUEs have been abused, or is it very much just a case of, well, here's what we found and we don't have any more information? The cocaine jumps out, I suppose. Cocaine in 2015 in the Premier League. There's no ban, it seems, if you are test positive for cocaine as a Premier League player. There's no ban. But if you're a non-Premier League player and you test positive for cocaine, there's a 2-year ban.
Yeah. That's what jumped out at me, and obviously
incredible celebrations if you make it from the Championship up to the Premier League that night. Bombs away.
Exactly, and look at the drugs for ADHD. Absolutely, if you take that percentage of professional soccer players in the Premiership, there's bound to be players who suffer from ADHD and they have medication for it. I think how I read this article was, it was the worry that certain doctors or players may use the ADHD to mask something else. That's how I took it as.
Correct. It's a masking agent as well.
For other drugs.
Yeah. See, that's the point here, Sarah. If these are used correctly, then you can say, okay, there's a doctor here and everything's above board. But these drugs can be abused as well, and we've seen in various sports TUEs abused. So that's the question mark now for the Premier League to grapple with, if they want to grapple with it.
And I suppose the graphic here is non-Premier League players versus Premier League players, and the perception here is that you have more support in a Premier League team, in a professional environment.
Yeah.
In a non-Premier League environment, or like myself in Croke Park, are you being hung out to dry? What kind of protection do you have? And are you taking your life in your hands if you agree to a drugs test, but you don't necessarily have the same support that those Premier League guys have, where there's no sanction, and some guys are getting up to 4 years for an instance where they don't necessarily understand what they've done, or why a TUE might be misconstrued.
Well, that's the back page of the Mail. That's an exclusive, by the way. That's nowhere else. So good work by Edmund Willison getting the Freedom of Information request in. Daniel Kinahan, as you can imagine, is right across the papers, front pages and back. Been extraordinary few days, really, post that press conference at Dublin City Hall. Do you want to get the ball rolling on any piece which caught your eye, Bernard?
On Kinahan?
Yeah.
They're
all of a similar vein, really, I would say.
Yeah, they're all a similar vein. Michael Foley in the Times, but yeah, it's across. Every paper has a piece on it, and I think what hit home to me or this week was obviously the press conference for the Fury White fight, and obviously 17 journalists asked about 40 questions of Fury and White, but Kinahan wasn't mentioned once, and obviously had been well briefed or well streamed in advance to make sure that there was no unfriendly questions. But yeah, just it's phenomenal the influence he's had on boxing. There's the front page of Sunday Independent says he's been investing in rugby. When you drill down into it, it's a sponsorship of a club in Spain. But boxing has seemed to mean where most of the sports washing has happened, and it's going to be interesting, obviously, as the pressure mounts on Kinahan and his syndicates, whether there's anyone else, I suppose, to step up and put this type of money into boxing. It seems to be very much built on a foundation of sand. Obviously, there's still huge demand, 95,000 people in Wembley. It's not a popular sport, but how much of it actually has been built on his investments.
Of this press conference during the week, Sarah, 17 journalists, writes Mick Foley, asked about 40 questions of Fury and White. Kinahan was not mentioned once. After the press conference, the top-rank reporter Christina Poncher, who hosted the event, told the Times that another top-rank representative on the call had decided who was permitted to ask questions. If anyone seriously thinks this story can be suffocated by silence, the actions of the US government alone have already ensured that it will not. And several pieces talk about Bob Arum, for instance, making a fairly dramatic U-turn. So Mark Gallagher here in the Mail on Sunday says it's clear now that Arum realised what a miscalculation it was to defend Kinahan. And he has a quote, "We are not going to deal with Daniel," Arum told Sportsmail on Tuesday. "We respect the sanctions. We will deal directly with Tyson and his lawyer. I wasn't pleased with a number of things he was doing in boxing. I was looking to sever ties anyway." And then he spoke to Yahoo later in the week and he accused Kinahan of using bullying tactics. So there's a real about turn on the part of Bob Arum. And Mark Gallagher notes, aside from a few brave souls such as Barry McGuigan and Billy Walsh, there were few in boxing who were willing to put their head above a parapet. Which I'm sure you can understand to an extent, Sarah.
I can't imagine that I would go into my job on a, Kieran Cunningham being a person that I know and that I know has been, stringent in terms of his pursuit of honesty and truth and fairness in relation to the story. He has a family and he has a daily life, and he's come through this knowing that he was potentially going to be intimidated, on the street, by people who don't want these bad these stories to come out about Kinahan. And it's a very tough place to be when you're looking for truth and honesty in journalism, and there's a lot of pressure coming from people that you don't know or understand how dangerous they are.
Eamon Sweeney's writing about it on the back page as well, and he talks of the likes of Paddy Barnes and Michael Conlon and Carl Frampton, and he writes there's a certain reluctance to look at the implications of Barnes, Conlon and Frampton's MTK links. It's easy to rail against foreign promoters and the money men at media companies for apparently getting into bed with Kinahan. Criticising 3 Irish sporting heroes for doing so is a different matter. This leads to the pretense that certain stars can still be ranked among the good guys despite cozying up to Kinahan. It's a comforting delusion, but a dishonest one. Those involved with MTK and its associates knew what they were doing and who they were involved with. They are not children. They took the decision to go with MTK because they thought it made good business sense. Money talked. And certainly I know, like, for instance, Michael Conlon no longer with MTK and has gone out on his own, but there's a real sense, Bernard, that has hung over these boxers, and certainly post the media ban in the Republic, really the coverage of their fights has been close to non-existent.
Yeah, it has in the South, in the Republic, but as I said, worldwide it still seems boxing is thriving, so when we're a tiny market, it's as I said, it seems to be across the world. He's got his fingerprints in nearly every major boxing warehouse or boxing club that have professional players, and being able to be very much the puppet master controlling fights. Yeah. But where does it end?
It's interesting. The English papers are certainly have their eyes have been opened to a large extent over the last 12 months to 18 months, and Donald McRae very much is, by way of building up to what is a big fight at Wembley and English fighters, he's absolutely taken the Kinahan line and discussing the lack of questioning in the press conference as opposed to avoiding the subject.
Yeah, he was very, very strong on it. I thought his piece was excellent. As you said, it's across all the papers, but I think I admire the journalists now who are really asking questions and aren't afraid to spit in the soup as such, because I mean that Don McRae is most of the journalism I read around him is about boxing, but he's challenging those that effectively he would be relying upon for interviews or access in the future, and that's certainly not easy. So I think credit to him and all the other journalists who've been very strong on it.
Sarah, Shane Lowry sits down with Paul Kimmage to reflect on the Masters.
Yeah, and look, an incredible performance at the Masters, and you'd have to be incredibly proud of him. And I know I was on with you a few weeks ago, and I was a bit upset about his stance with Saudi Arabia, and this is the kind of issue with Shane. He's an incredible sportsman, and you want to back him, and sometimes he makes the wrong decisions, but at the Masters again, he got flack, about his position, I suppose, with his caddy, and that relationship that he has with him. And I feel like sometimes people don't necessarily understand the relationship you have with your teammate and how far you have to go. And maybe Bernard will back me up here. It's ugly sometimes, and we were focusing perhaps, in that instance on the wrong thing with his caddy. And I'm hoping, that people understand that sometimes you have to have ugly conversations with your teammates, and you get to move on, and nobody has to be sacked or cancelled, or that sense that it can't be fixed. I felt that his performance at the Masters should outweigh the comments around that conversation with his caddy.
Is this you apologising for your behaviour in the past? Is that what's going on here? You were the shouter as opposed to the shoutee?
I was always the shouter. I know, and that's why I'm saying I use the word ugly, like very straight. It's very straight here. But I'm sure Bernard will step in here. Sometimes conversations with you have with your teammates are so ugly.
Yeah.
But you move past it because you know it comes from a place of wanting to be a better performer.
Mr. Nice Guy has a cutting edge is the headline. 2-page spread in the Sunday Independent. Looks like there's a part 2 as well next week. So this is at Hilton Head, where Shane, by the way, is in the final pairing this evening. He's been playing great golf, and he'll go out in the final pairing this evening with a great chance of winning. Shot a 65 yesterday. So this is on the Monday at Hilton Head, South Carolina. And you feel like the piece is building up to the discussion about the moment with the caddy, and clearly Shane Lowry feels it's coming as well, because they're going through the week and going through the round, and they're on to building up to the moment. I think it's on Saturday, isn't it, or Friday? Maybe it's Friday. You make par on 10, 11, 12. Shane says, yeah, I par the hard holes and then I F up on 13, in brackets, long pause. Paul Kimmage, go on. Shane, I knew you were going to ask me about this because everyone was effing talking about it. I didn't say anything. Shane laughs. I'm not stupid, so he knows it's coming. So he says, yeah, I had words with Bo. That's his caddy on 13. I had a good go with him. Go on. Basically, I missed my drive a little bit, but I'm in the fairway. I have 220 yards to the front, but it's silly to go for it, so I'm going to lay up to a good number and try and get it down to a lob wedge. And Shane says it was an 8-iron. I was trying to hit it 150, but I didn't do the numbers right, and it was playing 180 with the wind. So I was 30 yards out on the layup, and now I've got 110 yards instead of 80 to the flag. So Paul Kimmage says, it's after you hit the third shot when you have a go at Bo. I said something like, I'm 30 yards out, or something with a few expletives thrown in. And then here's the part where it gets quite uncomfortable, I think, for Shane. Paul says, I have it here. Shane says, I don't want to listen to that. Paul says, I've written it down. He laughs, F off, will you? Paul quotes him, you said, left myself no shot. What an effing shit layup that was. Well done, Bo. Only 30 yards out. Well done. Here's my question. How was it his fault, says Paul Kimmage? And Shane says, because I hit the wrong club for my second shot. But you hit the shot. Look, I know, I'm trying to win the Masters. I need someone to guide me. That's what caddies are for. I'm not saying he was completely at fault. It was some of my fault as well. And yes, I had a good go with him. But people don't understand how hard it is. We're out there playing one of the trickiest courses in the world. Every shot means so much to me, and I F up and I let it out. That's what I do. Am I going to change for anyone? No, is Shane's feeling. I'm not going to change for anyone. So, because I don't say he fully trusts Bo with every club. If I think it's a 6-iron and he thinks it's a 7, I'll hit 7. And there's just one last point that was kind of interesting. This was kind of a good insight maybe into how different people operate. So Paul Kimmage makes the point, in 25 years we've never seen Tiger eat out a caddy like that. We've never seen Harrington do it. And Lowry says, but that's, I'm a different person. And he remembers that when Bo was on paternity leave, that his friend Darren Reynolds was caddying for him for 2 months. I didn't perform for 2 months. When we started playing again after COVID, miscut, 60th, tied 39th, miscut. And what Larry says about that is, I didn't feel I could be myself with Darren. It was all too nice. I'm a competitor. I'm out there trying to do my best, and people think. And then he stops himself and he says, I keep saying people think, but what do I care what people think? And Kimmage says, we all care. And Larry says, okay, I suppose. And he says, he, as a final point, says when him and Wendy are having an argument, she says to him, everyone thinks you're an effing nice fella. Which is end of argument, I would think. So it's all very interesting. Look, you've been sports people, you've been under huge pressure, and yet it was an ugly moment. And if you saw it on camera, it went on too long. It wasn't just like an F you, Bo. God, Bo. It was like a, well done, Bo. Well done. And even as Bo started to walk away, he was like, well done. And I suspect he did not want to see it back because a bit like the reality TV contestant who comes out and is doing their interview with Davina McCall, to be confronted on a screen with you at your worst, at your ugliest, it's almost hard to bear. No one wants to see that, and I suspect he wants to avoid it because he knows it wouldn't look good.
Yeah, absolutely. But I think I'm really interested in high performing partnerships, teams, etc. And years ago, everyone used to think, right, get two really talented people, put them together. The goal is to win the Masters, and you go do it, right? But actually now, all the research says no. The first block of kind of successful teams is safety. It's called psychological safety, right? And then from that you get trust, and then you get the behaviours that are acceptable, and then you set your goals, right? So,
And what does safety mean?
Safety is basically that you're safe being yourself, and that Bo can challenge Shane can challenge Bo, but they've got such a level of trust that they're able to park it. So like Shane could have had that outburst. He's obviously mentally frazzled because he's made a mistake. Then he could have been thinking about, how does Bo feel about that? Because you know you've done it, right? But obviously he's got that level of safety with Bo and trust that Shane was able to leave behind without worrying that Bo was going to carry it on. And actually, like, to be honest, he rescued the situation. I mean, he didn't win the Masters, but he had a successful competition. The problem is, and why sport is fascinating, particularly from outsiders, and I'm not a golf fan, but I'm really interested in golfers, and how they react, is that we all get a glimpse into that. But as Sarah knows, and when you're in teams, like, there's certain people in your team who with pressure will react in ways maybe that aren't ideal, particularly in the build-up.
Like Sarah.
I don't know, I'm not sure about Sarah, but myself, or we've all been there. But when you know them and you trust them, you let it slide.
Yeah.
Because Saturday they're going to perform.
Johnny Sexton jumps to mind.
Yeah, Johnny would go through a wall for everybody. But
and that's his redeeming quality.
Yes,
ultimately.
yeah, and there's the guys who wouldn't go through a wall for you, but you have to tolerate because they're brilliant. And Saturday. No, I'm not going to name anybody, but Saturday that they want Rocky Elsom. So Rocky Elsom was a phenomenal player. He was man of the match 6 times in 2009 in 9 games in the Champions Cup or Heineken Cup. Would I have a Heineken Cup medal without him? No, I wouldn't. But was he the best guy to be around? Was he selfish? Yes, he was. So he wasn't like Johnny Sexton where you could trust him with your life. But yet, he wasn't a bad fella. But just, he was very individualised in his approach.
Well, I even spoke to one player who was like, he wouldn't even do the warm-up properly with us.
Yeah.
And there's a point where you have to say, okay, if he keeps getting man of the match, he can warm up whatever way he wants. But with the same player was saying, I wasn't sure long term it was such a good thing.
Yeah. Well, we only had him for a short period. But if you look at his career post Leinster, he didn't really hit the heights that he should have, and definitely if you speak to teammates who played with him, he became a difficult individual, particularly when he became captain. So for us, he had a leadership role, but he wasn't a captain. We had obviously O'Driscoll, Leo Cullen, Cheika was very good at managing Rocky, and let Rocky have his own unique personality and character, but knew what he could bring. It's like Alex Ferguson with Eric Cantona, and the story about him turning up at the airport in his own casual gear, and Alex letting him slide, bringing him off for a walk, etc., without finding him, which everyone else thought he was going to do. So we've all been there, but it's like, we trusted Rocky to get it done on a Saturday. I think Bo in the situation, and Shane also trusts Bo to make the right decisions. Like he says, as you said, I fully trust Bo at every club. If he thinks it's a 6 iron, I'll hit a 7. Listen, it's hard to explain to people who don't play golf for a living, especially in very highly pressurised situations. And, Shane Lowry wouldn't have done what he's done without being a winner and a winning mentality. And winning mentality is different. I mean, the fact that Tiger Woods has never balled out his caddy, we know Tiger has another flaws to his personality. So it's a very good interview. It's interesting, but I think that everybody has their own unique way of preparing, of acting, and the most important thing is that they're able to be themselves on a golf course. And obviously he regrets it now, but realistically that's the way he has to be to win.
I'd love to know, it doesn't quite come up, maybe to get to it at some stage, but I watched it and I wondered to what extent, in crossing the line and realising I've crossed the line a bit here, this was a touch beyond the normal to and fro of player and caddy, did he distract himself? Because then he 3 putts on the green. Now it was a difficult enough putt, but he was playing very well, and it's difficult enough to take on Augusta, but if you've created a dynamic, even if for instance, Sarah, well, Bo can take it, this is how we operate, he knows who I am, but at some point if you're thinking, I'm going to have to apologise to him later, that's an extra bit of energy sapped for the remaining 2 hours of the round. And so I'd love to know if he thinks it affected him. He 3 putts on 13, doesn't finish the way he should finish, he walks off a bit disconsolate on Saturday. I wonder if you're taking on Augusta, but you're also standing on the tee box and it's gone pretty quiet with you and your caddy, and you're thinking to yourself, oh man, I'm starting to feel a bit guilty here, and that might have been an aspect where it was a touch self-defeating on the Saturday as well. I mean, you can probably delve into your own experience where you feel, oh crap, I'm going to have to apologise for that one later. In the meantime, here comes the sliotar.
I never ever thought about who I had to apologise to afterwards, and I genuinely mean that.
So you're a sociopath is what's emerging here.
Yeah, but those, and I don't think that sapped any energy. I would be so surprised if, 4 years' time, Shane's sitting in front of you and says that sapped energy at that point. That performance level, and I loved the way Bernard referenced that psychological safety, that trust. There's teammates that I've known that, that we've had those ugly conversations, and neither of us ever felt like that took energy away from where we needed to be or where we needed to go. Those conversations happen in the most random of ways 3 weeks later.
Sure.
It's almost cathartic to let it out 3 weeks later, but it never at that moment did I ever feel like I was wrong, or I ever let it, take my energy, and I'll stand over that till the day that I die.
Very good. Well, next week there's a part 2, Quest for Greatness, Shane Lowry, on life, love and ambition since the Open. So well worth the read. It's not just about the moment on 13 as well.
That ugly moment on the 13th.
Yeah, which, do you know, it's interesting. I think on American television, they killed the mic for it. It was muted. So can you imagine how many moments like this we miss all the time? How commonplace they must be all the time. So, it's just that it was caught on camera and we were then talking about it afterwards. But it's kind of interesting. He was aware everyone's talking about it. Steve Thompson, I'm sure you're interested in this very grim situation. So Steve Thompson, World Cup winner with England, early onset dementia, very much puts it down to the spate of concussions and the toll the game took on his health. And he has a new book coming out, and it was serialised in the UK edition of the Sunday Times. You can read it online, which I did, and it's absolutely horrific, as you might imagine. He talks about screaming at his dog at one point, who was misbehaving, and his 3-year-old son was staring up at him, kind of confused, and he realised he was screaming at the dog but using his son's name. And then he describes other occasions where he's talking to his wife and just can't remember her name. They're mid-conversation, as you would be, around the kitchen, and he knows that she's his wife, and it's just like, oh, what's her name? And that is a terrifying early glimpse of where he knows he's probably headed, and he talks about the enormous guilt he feels at what he's going to ask of his family over the coming decades, and has had some very dark thoughts about the imposition he's going to cause, and would I be better off if, and it's utterly horrific, it really is. So he has a new book coming out, and he talked as well about watching the 03 World Cup back with a friend during lockdown, because they were showing all sporting events, and he couldn't remember any of it. It was all, God, I don't remember that pool game, and then knockout stages, and even the final. No memory of it. So Clive Woodward has responded in the Mail, and we'll get to Stephen Jones in a moment. He's talking about rugby almost going too far in terms of rulings and decisions when it comes to trying to protect players. But Woodward is, he's as horrified as everyone, Bernard. You must be horrified.
Yeah, I played against Thompson, and he was as Woodward says, he was the best hooker in the world in 2003. And it was interesting. Look, he's having an unbelievably hard time, but he says he wished he never played in 2003 final, which is very rare for an athlete. Usually, if they've had a massive success, even though their whole life is affected, they still say, but I would never change that for the world. But he's in a very, very tough place. I think there's a TV documentary coming out about him, and he's probably, there's a lot of players who've joined this lawsuit, against World Rugby and against the unions around concussion. But in terms of how badly it's affecting him, he seems to be, on a very extreme scale, and it's very, very sad. And I don't know, like, money's not good to him. Even a compensation is not good to him, really, given the fact of how his family life's been affected, and his memory loss, and how he struggles to manage that relationship with his children, etc. So it's very, very, it's shocking. And then obviously every single week as a pundit, we're commentating on head height challenges, wondering whether they're yellow card or red card, and there hasn't been. I mean, even yesterday Leicester had a red card for head eye contact. We saw a red card in Ravenhill. It could have been 2 in the same tackle. Players aren't adapting their behaviours.
It's funny, isn't it?
It's so slow.
Well, funny is that it's curious. But 2 years into this, I'd say we're about 2 years into these red cards being flashed for these any contact with the head moments. And look at Charlie Ewell's, James Ryan.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a very physical sport. Guys are bigger. There's less space.
Yeah.
There's little room for error. But I'm actually really shocked at how slow players are to adapt.
I'm asking, anytime I get a chance, I'm asking defence coaches if they're on, or players, what are you being coached now? Because I can't figure out why it's still happening. I'm getting wishy enough answers, I have to say.
I don't think they're being coached drastically differently.
I don't either.
And also what the reaction of and then look at it, it's human nature, you protect your team, but when a player steps over the mark and gets a red card or gets cited, the support he gets from the manager, which is important, etc. But you haven't seen many players lose their position or lose their contract. Maybe Papali'i and Connacht, he was red carded 3 times. Maybe that's a factor in why he hasn't been renewed. But I don't think we can blame the officials all we want, but I think the coaching and playing fraternity, a little bit slow to react here. Very slow.
I don't know if they're reacting. We're still seeing red cards. Woodward, so the headline piece in his mail piece, the headline of it is, it's heartbreaking to watch my World Cup heroes suffer so much. And he also says, as you did, that he thought Thompson was the best hooker at the 03 World Cup and for a few years thereafter. But Sarah, he makes the point with rugby. So Bernard is highlighting the slowness to adjust to these high tackles and these head collisions. But Woodward makes maybe the more worrying point for rugby, which is that there is just an intrinsic physicality which is impossible to take out of the game's DNA. So let's imagine a world where everyone's tackling perfectly. And what Woodward says is, you can be tackled perfectly legally around the legs and still knock yourself out or get concussed as your head hits the ground. Stray elbows, opposition knees can accidentally hit your head at any time, or you can drive in with a textbook tackle, hip height, and hit the bony part of your opponent and come off much worse. And that is the scary prospect, I suppose, for rugby. And it's another generation or two until we realise if taking away the high hits is enough to prevent the damage that we're seeing the previous generation deal with.
Sport is, not just rugby. I had 2 camogie teammates who suffered concussion, and at the level that required them to step away from the game for 6, 8, 10 months, and they're still suffering now. Right. And I suppose you're thinking as a player now, and as you read this, my duty of care to my teammates or my duty of care to the opposition, and. We're talking about the slowness of players reacting to the changes that are required to make it safe for players to play sport. So do we have to step back as players and go, do I need to be as physical? Is it worth being this physical to do the damage that we're going to do to somebody to win a game? And that's what I look at now. I go, I owe a duty of care to the person on the field next to me or the opposition. And I wonder, do we all need to step back and say, how much is it worth to me to win this game?
Yeah,
that's where I'm at,
Just on Thompson, and I'm not sure if a lot of people realise this, he actually retired with a neck injury, had a big insurance payout, and was out of the game for a while, got second and third opinion, and came back.
In France, wasn't it?
In France, yeah, he came to breathe, so he paid back the money he got from insurance, and obviously that was null and void. He accepted that he could never claim for that again, came back to breathe, and I can't remember, I presume it was 2011 World Cup, he thought he could win a second World Cup, just couldn't get back to the same level of form. But I wonder, and it's just, I wonder, was it concussions he got in the second bout that maybe has made it even worse for him? I mean, can you imagine being in his situation, or his wife, and saying, it's one thing, having that injury, but was it that desire to get back to play for England again that maybe made it as bad as it is? It must be an absolute mess for him and his family.
Yeah, he seems just in a kind of shock. I mean, and there's an ITV documentary about it actually, which is on the way. Clive Woodward mentions that. So Woodward also said there's still much work to be done to break down some of these flying clear-outs are extraordinarily dangerous to heads and limbs, and referees are not doing enough to eradicate them. They are illegal but are not being penalised, which is another point. Stephen Jones, by the way, we don't spend too long on it, but he's just he was observing what he felt was just a very accidental moment in a game. Guy Porter of Leicester sent off for nothing. He says Porter dismissed for a simple rugby collision of a sort that happens about 200 times a game. This is where rugby's caution starts to affect severely the nature of the sport itself. I didn't see that.
I totally disagree with him.
Oh, do you?
I like Stephen Jones, but it was horrendous. It was actually one of the worst I've seen this year, because effectively the Claremont player was running a decoy line. At first, it was accidental, but it's the one that has to be a red card.
Right.
So, when you have the ball, you expect contact, and in some ways you can protect yourself. You can't protect yourself if you get a head-on-head, but you are braced for impact. But this one here, Lee, the Claremont number 8, Fritz Lee was literally, I didn't see the hit. Now, first, it was an accidental collision, but it was head-on-head at high volume, and for me, it was a red card. And because if you let that slide, you're just looking for ways to not give reds. So, and I think the citing commissioners, in fairness, they did ban the player for 5 weeks, I think. So yeah, I disagree with Stephen here, and I think we need to support the officials. And if they get it wrong on the side of caution, so be it.
Okay.
And it's very difficult for the officials, but I think if as a punditry, journalists, rugby people, we don't support them and understand it's very difficult, but safety is paramount, we're going to get mixed messages.
That's what we're talking about. It's a duty of care piece, Bernard. Like, ultimately, I'm going into a tackle. I need to know ultimately that I don't need the other person to be ill-affected by how I'm going to impose myself on the game.
Yeah.
That's how I feel. And I'd love to have known that when I was so intensely involved in games, 5 or 6 years ago. That trigger piece, it's how is this going to impact them in the long run? And I think we all need to educate ourselves around that.
Yeah.
Sarah, you picked out Ruth Fahey's piece in the Sunday Independent. Move the next Irish match, the big Irish match against Finland, move it to the Aviva Stadium is the call.
And I agree. And I suppose fundamentally why I'm looking for the game to be moved to the Aviva is Windsor Park was a sellout for Northern Ireland last weekend. And while the result didn't go Northern Ireland's way, they lost 5-0 to England, they had 15,000 fans there. And we have 4 months to build up to this next game for Ireland. And I think we could have a big crowd in the Aviva because of the momentum, because of an amazing sponsor in Sky right now for Ireland. And I think Irish women in sport and those particular group of players, because of their commitment, deserve the backing, and they deserve the Aviva to be open to them.
It's a very easy sell as well. So you presume Ireland will win away to Georgia. They beat them, 13-0 or 11-0? Everyone's beaten them by a hockey score at the moment, a cricket score. So they'll beat Georgia away, and then Finland, September the 1st at the Aviva Stadium. A win against Finland could secure second place, could secure qualification to the playoff stages. So that's an easy sell, like in a line. And we are event junkies as well.
And look, it's the 12th man. It's that extra roar. It's 10, 15,000 women in the Aviva supporting these amazing athletes. And, I'm not all about, it's next week, it's 2 weeks' time. We need to move the bus as quickly as we can. We have a window here for the whole, population. I'm not saying everyone has to go, but enough people could go to the Aviva to really support these women in, qualifying for their first campaign. And we talked before about sponsors and, and really getting behind the team. Sky's sponsorship has been incredible. And I can't outbelieve. It's the easiest hashtag, but it's so bright and straightforward. And there's an opportunity here to support a great group of women. And I loved what Ruth said. I actually played golf with Ruth about 4 weeks ago, and we'd never come up against each other, in all the years that I was playing soccer and she was playing soccer. We met in the golf course 4 weeks ago. And when I saw the piece today, I went, yes, Ruth, that's incredible. There's 4 months here to really build this up. Let's get this done.
Well, if we can get 40,000 routinely to football finals, ladies football finals, then this is an easy sell. I would think it's a no-brainer. In the only thing I would say is actually maybe just consult with players and management first, and just double check that they're not of the opinion, well, we're very used to Tala, we're used to the pitch, it's an advantage for us, we have a feel for it, and a great atmosphere there suits us better. But once if they give thumbs up, green light, Aviva Stadium sounds good to us, then plough on, I would think.
Well, I think the girls are looking at Spain and 91,000 fans, 2 weeks ago in Spain for the women's game. And I think these players now understand that they're carrying a little more pressure, but they're so excited about what's happening. And, the likes of Katie McCabe and Louise Quinn playing in the WSL, Niamh Fahey, week in, week out now, they're getting used to the bigger crowds. So they're all, it's incumbent on them to be able to carry this wave of positivity. And I'd say they're going, let's go. Bring as many people as you can.
Yeah, I suspect you're right. I don't think they're that attached to Tala that, they wouldn't jump at the Aviva. So, but maybe just in the interest of, putting performance first. So just double check with them on the off chance, but I suspect they'd say absolutely. Did you ever, as a matter of interest, smaller stadium versus bigger, were there ever times where you preferred the familiarity of the RDS to a certain game at the Aviva, or would you always jump at the chance to go Aviva?
Yeah, we jumped at the chance, but I think it's topical because of obviously the Thomond Park Munster situation at the moment. I've no doubt that Munster players would prefer to play Toulouse in Thomond Park.
Yeah.
You know, it's a big enough stadium. Aviva isn't their second home as such, and I think they have a far greater chance of beating Toulouse if the game was played in Thomond or one of the big GA stadiums in Munster, because of that nuance that would give it. I think it's going to be very hard to see Munster beat Toulouse. So just the background to that is obviously Munster are due to play Toulouse at home in the quarter final, but because of the Ed Sheeran concert, they can't play in Thomond Park.
A genuine question: has any artist wreaked more havoc on an Irish sporting summer in history?
You know, it's incredible, the ramifications of both, you know, rugby and GA booking them in to get much needed revenue, but obviously it's blown up a little bit in terms of.
I feel like we're going to move this game against Finland to the Aviva, and then it'll turn out Ed Sheeran has a book.
Or Michael Bublé, one of the two.
Yeah.
You know, it's either Ed or Michael Bublé. That's always the case.
Yeah. If there's ever a time when Michael Bublé's not playing the Aviva, hell is frozen over. So, well, that's Ruth Fahey, page 12, Sunday. And I think that's going to gather momentum, actually. I think that's going to...
Well, as I said, it's 4 months. You know, we're not. It's not like we're asking to switch the lights on next Tuesday. You know, we have a genuine movement here, and I think Sky will be really positive in all of this. And you couldn't get a bigger sponsor than Sky for the women's sport. And look, you know, obviously Cadbury's is a massive sponsor as well, and you know, and they're involved, but. Definitely Sky have the momentum here, and I think they'll push it. Okay.
By the way, just to flip back to rugby for 1 second, because there was a piece I wanted to ask for your thoughts on. I ask the pundits this question every time they're on. This is the Leinster question. Whenever we're trying to analyse Leinster, it's quite difficult because they blitz most teams.
Yeah.
And they look amazing doing it. So it's like, but then they've been sucker punched the last couple of seasons, be it Saracens or La Rochelle. And so generally when I ask the pundits, they're not worried, but Neil Francis here states it pretty succinctly. The byline in the piece in the Sunday Times: Leinster's skill can only take them so far in Europe. Ultimately, their forward pack still lacks size. So in effect, he's remembering being at the 2019 final against Saracens in Newcastle and seeing Will Skelton and thinking, good God. And he says, you know, La Rochelle, Toulouse, Racing, they have this sort of chain gang pack that can subdue Leinster with size and brute force, and even Leinster with a powerhouse front row and an obdurate and dynamic back row might not be able to compensate for being underpowered in the second row. Ross Maloney, Josh Murphy, very good on Friday night at the Aviva, but he's pointing to the absence of Ryan Baird and James Ryan, and he says they have a decent chance in the Heineken Cup, but it is patently obvious they will struggle in the knockout stages against the first side they meet with a big aggressive pack. The answers we are getting thus far don't fill us with confidence.
Look, I do agree with him. I do worry about Leinster when they play big physical teams, or teams who've got threats all over the field, like Toulouse, who aren't built on that physicality. The Will Skelton one is interesting. I mean, he's one man, and he has had a big influence on games against Leinster, but I do think Leinster have worked towards getting more power shifted across their team. So, for example, the game in La Rochelle that Leinster lost last year in the semi-final, you know, no Sexton. Porter was subbing because he was playing a tight head. No Caelan Doris, who was out with concussion. No Dan Sheehan to come off the bench. No Gibson Park. And I think Gibson Park is key, because if you play with Gibson Park is probably the best nine in the world at the moment of creating tempo and space, right? So if you play at that game, he's not the best nine in the world. Like, he's not an Antoine Dupont in terms of being able to score, but he brings other people into the game at an incredible level. Honestly, it's phenomenal how much he's improved and how important he is to Leinster and Ireland. That's nothing against Luke McGrath. It's just Leinster can't match. Leicester's going to be interesting because they're a very strong set piece team, but they can't match Racing or La Rochelle in terms of sheer power, in terms of one-on-one contests, like 3 or 4 guys, and particularly not the second row. Like James Ryan, Ryan Baird will find it difficult against, you know, La Rochelle or Racing in that area. But Leinster spread it across the team. So Porter as a loose head, you know, he's made a huge difference. You know, having Sheen to come on for the last 20 minutes for Kelleher. Doris is a power athlete. He mightn't be as big as some of the big giants that he comes up against, but he wins collisions. And Robbie Henshaw, James Lowe, etc., have that power game. But it's about being able to play at pace. When you look back at the Saracens' loss, they just got completely hamstrung at the scrum. I mean, the scrum was the source of most of their issues. Kelleher didn't play that day. I think Leo and Stuart, they played Sean Cronin. Keane Healy, his power isn't where it was at, and Saracens were very, very good. There's no scrum left in the Champions Cup as powerful as Saracens, so I don't think Leinster will get demolished at scrum time, but I think from a power point of view, they play at such speed and with such variety. If they have the likes of Doris and Porter and Sheen and Kelleher available, and Gibson Park particularly, I think that they can do it this year. I genuinely do. I thought they laid down a marker Friday night against Connacht, where they just had a real attitude, and they could have played them lots of different ways, but they went after them directly, showing that power, and that's something that is going to be absolutely key, because you can't run away from a fight, particularly in the latter stages of Europe. So I can see where Frano's worried, but I would say that Leinster look like they're better equipped, and also for next year. I know he says, look at Jason Jenkins. He won 2 caps the same day. He won his first cap, his first and last. But he's been brought in for a reason, to give Leinster that extra bit of power. And also, he says about James Ryan, I don't think we should be, as people who are outside, really casting aspersions on when people should play again. So James Ryan, I saw him warming up on Friday night. If Leinster and the RFU and he feels he's ready to play, well, then obviously we have to take it on trust that he can play. It's just an interesting one on the whole concussion debate, and I've just come from saying player safety is paramount, and I do believe it. But also, I don't think as outsiders we should really cast our opinion on areas that we know little about.
Yeah,
does that make sense?
Oh, totally. I mean, I haven't seen his medical records.
No.
So I'll come to you by that way on that piece in the Observer you picked out in Crystal Palace as we wrap up. Sarah, anything else grab your eye that you fancied giving a mention to? I'm sure you're reading all the championship coverage and getting ready for showtime. How many points do you think Cork will beat Limerick by?
Not enough. I think Limerick were very shrewd in this year's league, and they tested the boundaries of the referees, and they put referees under the spotlight. And I feel it's the referee will be under the spotlight today, and it will allow Limerick to play the way they want to play.
Oh,
and
really?
you can read from that what you will.
Well, I don't even know what to read into it. Go on.
I think they made the league about referees and the way referees treat Limerick, and they took red cards at different points, and they took yellow cards, and they took decisions against them to allow the focus to become about the referee. And I feel like today the referee will be very aware that he will be incredibly scrutinised because of how Limerick played the league, and I think that will allow Limerick to be incredibly physical today, and they will ultimately intimidate Cork, who are stickmen. And this is a game of combat, and I don't think Cork are ready for Limerick today.
Interesting. So you think they went out and were ultra aggressive and really pushed the lines deliberately in the league in a bid to, well, I don't know why. I mean, because the flip side of your theory would be that they have now acquired a reputation as a team that crossed the line, and therefore it's easier to send them off because, well, you've got a history, mate. I mean, I might be sending you off today, but like lots of other referees have sent you off before, so it's on you, it's not me, no?
It doesn't work like that in the GA. Like the referee today will be of the vein, the Brian Gavin vein, like let the game go. It's a combat game. We're hurlers. Let this game be the game that we want the game to be. And the referee will look to make the game a spectacle and not punish necessarily, the game for the physicality that Limerick will want to bring, and he will allow things to happen today that he didn't allow to happen in the league. Interesting. And I'm very straight on that.
Yeah. No, that's really interesting. Because when I try and think of the Limerick red cards, a lot of them are like for off the ball, like flinging a hurley and scuffle stuff as opposed to heavy hits. But
in order to be able to play as physically as they want to play, they had to set a precedent where they were obviously under the spot, in the spotlight. And the referee today is going to want the game to be about hurling, so he's going to let that physicality happen today. It's going to intimidate Cork, because Cork now are braced for that physicality that Limerick will bring, and the referee will allow the game to be played the way that he thinks that the spectators want to see the game to be played.
Yeah, I probably disagree with you. I just don't think you willfully go out and do that. I think it's really interesting theory. Like, from my point, I would think Limerick are saying we're the best team by distance. We've whooped everyone. We've had no trouble whipping Cork. We're better than them. We don't need to go out in the league and get a bunch of red cards to somehow soften up referees. Like, that seems like it may look like that in retrospect, but I don't know how John Kiley would sit down and Paul Kinnerk and say, this is the way to go in the league. Let's tell the lads to go out and really push it and get a few sending-offs thrown in, no?
The conversations after last year were like, God, Garrett Haggerty's so physical.
Yeah.
You know, surely there's a way of stopping him. And then, you know, then the referee's looking at Garrett Haggerty going, God, maybe he's too physical. And then Limerick are braced for that, going, okay, now we have to show that, let's misdirect the focus here from Garrett Haggerty, who's a man mountain and who's a stunning hurler.
Yeah.
But we now need to direct the focus somewhere else, because now everyone's focused on, well, maybe actually they're too physical and you know, maybe they have too much in the tank. We need to pare that back. So let's get the frees involved. Let's start punishing them for their physicality. I feel like by doing that in the league, by taking those cards, by unduly pushing referees, now the referee today is going, no, I just want this to be about hurling.
Yeah.
And now we're back to basics where Garrett Haggerty gets to hurl and be physical. Okay,
interesting. Well, listen, a lot of people tend to listen to this podcast on a Monday morning or after the game, so it can be, I mean, who knows what lies in store, and they can have your theory ringing in their ears. You wanted to mention very briefly, because time is against us.
Yeah, it's a very small piece
in the Observer.
In the Observer by Ed Aarons. It's basically about what it's alluding to is it's the brains behind Crystal Palace's style of play. And the reason I like it is it's always fascinating to see how superstar players set up their management team. Okay, so Patrick Vieira, this guy Saïd Agoun, he was a teacher in Paris. He started to work for French television channel RMC as a kind of a pundit, blew people away with his depth of knowledge, a real geek of the game. And Emmanuel Petit, who obviously played with Vieira, had worked with him on TV, and he told Patrick Vieira about him. Patrick Vieira reached out to him and said, look, neither of us have a job at the moment, but when I get a job, I'm going to bring you on board, right? So he's come on board as his kind of tactical coach, but his role is also transition, so he works with the young players to help them go from the academy to the senior team. And only 6 English clubs have this at the moment. It's actually quite common in rugby, but obviously in football it's not. So Arsenal, Brentford, Fulham, Liverpool, Man United and Wolves have a coach whose job is to help those players transition. But why it was interesting to me is obviously, you know, the fact that he's not a traditional footballer. He's kind of self-made as such. But I remember hearing about Pep Guardiola, and Pep Guardiola got offered the Barcelona job. He was coaching the under 16s, and the president said to him, look, what's your management team? And most coaches will say, I need a head of S&C who I know, I need a head of medical, I need a coach, I need a head of recruitment. And it's quite standard, and they usually go with each other. So if you look at Sean Dyche, he brings a team with him, brings a team out. But Pep Guardiola said, look, I want all those guys plus this guy called Manuel Estierta, whose nickname was the Maradona of the water. So played water polo for Spain, went to 6 Olympics, and he's there as his people coach. So basically he just watches people in the group, and he's called Pep Guardiola says he's his guardian angel, and he's gone from Barcelona to Bayern to Man City. So if Pep Guardiola, who's obviously a brilliant tactician, obviously has lots of money to buy the best players in the world, is willing to, or understands what he needs to help him, it's just fascinating how, I suppose, high performers like Vieira or Pep Guardiola look at their own strengths and weaknesses and look to fill those gaps. So for guys who aren't, you know, ex-professional soccer players or basketballers, etc., there is a different route into potentially getting to the highest level as a coach.
Very interesting. We are out of time. Bernard Jackman, thank you so much for coming into the studio.
Thank you.
Sarah O'Donovan, great to have you on. Thanks so much, Sarah.
Thanks, guys.
The Sunday Papers on Off the Ball.